This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cú Chulainn, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Gráinne wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the trooping and solitary, and close to us sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside. Curse of fire and shadows. Every so often in Ireland, history overlaps with folklore, creating a story that exists between our world and that of the other folk. And one such case happened all the way back in 1642 during the Irish Confederate Wars. This war was a result of the rebellion from the previous year, where Irish Catholics fought against their own persecution and fought for more autonomy over their homeland. At the same time, the English parliamentarians and Scottish Covenanters were in open rebellion against King Charles I, resulting in utter chaos for both islands, and ultimately for Ireland to suffer under the brutal tyranny of Oliver Cromwell. But this story concerns a lesser villain of Ireland, the Scottish Covenanter Sir Fredrick Hamilton. Hamilton is best remembered for the great house he built in County Leitrim in 1638, around it which grew a town that to this day is called Manor Hamilton. During the Irish Rebellion of 41, Manor Hamilton was besieged several times, but remained standing, and Hamilton himself fought to keep the Catholic rebels from reaching the north of the island. And his brutality in enforcing this was best exemplified on July 1st, 1642. In the nearby Sligo, the O'Rourke clan had been organising several cattle raids, like in the times of Queen Maeve and Concobar MacNassa. In retribution, Sir Fredrick Hamilton marched a small group of soldiers to the Abbey of the White Friars, which sat in Carraloch. Once inside, he ordered his men to open fire on the Catholic clergy. Many of Hamilton's soldiers had only recently converted from Catholicism, some only under pain of punishment. They were hesitant to fire upon unarmed friars. The abbey was illuminated by candlelight, and as the soldiers looked up, they saw shadows dance across the church ceiling. But Hamilton again demanded that they fire. This time, 5 soldiers stepped forward and shot the friars. The shadows on the ceiling ceased their dance, and the candles flickered over the white of the white friars' robes that now ran red with blood. Some of the men of God who were still alive mourned and cried over the bodies of the dead. Not yet satisfied, Hamilton used the sacramental candles to set fire to the abbey and burn everyone else alive. As his soldiers departed the massacre, they could hear the burning friars praying with their last words before screaming or suffocating. But one abbot survived long enough to place a curse on the Protestant soldiers. May the fires that these men have kindled follow them until the end. May they always feel this heat. The shadows they have turned to ash will haunt them, and not even death will allow them to escape what they have done here today. Now, Catholic clergymen are not usually ones for curses. Curses, as a rule, are strictly pagan. But this is a time in Ireland where paganism still held strong roots despite religious domination. When Hamilton and his men returned to camp, they received word that 2 Irish messengers had escaped and had ridden northeast, last seen near Ben Bulben. If they reached reinforcements and told them of the horror committed by the soldiers, then the rebels would burn Manor Hamilton to the ground before Sir Fredrick could even make it back to fight for his home. Hamilton refused to let that happen, so he ordered his 5 most loyal soldiers, the ones who had not hesitated to shoot the unarmed abbots, to intercept the messengers before they could reach help. It was nightfall when the soldiers rode out. They were not as familiar with the countryside and found themselves riding into a dark forest, unable to see further than their horses. They slowed their pace. The 5 soldiers all knew each other well and began to reminisce. One had recently married and was looking forward to returning to his wife. The eldest had had his wife die, but looked forward to retiring to his plantation. And the youngest had not married, but had a girl he loved back home. The pleasantries were soon interrupted when the horses all came to an immediate halt. The mounts were restless, but they refused to move. The eldest soldier got off his horse and took a torch to see what was scaring them. He found a dead body in the middle of the road. The other soldiers came to inspect. They turned the body over, and all of them recoiled in horror. For each of the 5 soldiers saw their own face in the face of that dead body. They tried to convince themselves that this was exhaustion, tiredness, that their eyes were playing tricks on them. They were about to get back on their horses when they heard the sound of a woman crying. The soldiers walked towards the sound, which brought them to the banks of a river. There they saw an older woman washing clothes in the river and weeping. The old woman spoke. "Have you seen my son? He wears a crown of silver adorned with rubies." The eldest soldier stepped forward. "I am a God-fearing man, and I will not be taken in by this devil worship." He drew his sword and went to strike the old woman's head clean off. But where the sword should have made contact with the neck, the old woman disappeared. And with that, it was not only the horses who were spooked. As they continued to ride through the forest, the soldiers began to feel the trees themselves moaning like the souls of the dead. The men repeatedly looked behind them to see if they were being followed. The shadows of their horses seemed to detach and ride through the air. They multiplied, and as fast as the soldiers galloped, they could not seem to outrun the spectres of their own shadows. The young soldiers wanted to turn back. The older ones had a stronger sense of duty and knew that they could not return to Hamilton empty-handed. They knew they all had to keep moving. Eventually, the soldiers began to hear a faint droning sound. What next, they imagined. But through the forest, they came across a man playing the bagpipes. The sound was actually comforting to the soldiers, despite how bizarre it was for one to be playing bagpipes in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night. The piper stopped playing and said to the men, "Have any of ye gentlemen seen my wife? She was washing clothes in the river." "Enough!" cried the eldest soldier. He once again drew his sword, but didn't swing it this time. He just pointed it at the piper and said, "We are in service of Sir Fredrick Hamilton, and we are in pursuit of 2 wanted criminals. I order you to lead us out of these woods, or you will be arrested for obstructing the course of justice." The piper did not seem even remotely fazed, and replied, "2 messengers, you mean? I've seen them. I can show you where they went." The soldiers were suspicious, but cautiously optimistic. The piper slung his bellows round his back and summoned a beautiful white horse. He mounted and led the soldiers through the forest. The more they followed, the darker the road seemed to become. And then the soldiers felt the forest thin and become replaced with rock that began to incline. The horses again became restless and refused to move, but the soldiers kicked and bucked, and the steeds submitted. "Just a little further," the piper called back. The soldiers could barely see him for the fog. "Over this clearing you'll be able to see them on the road below." The white stallion calmly trotted forward, and the soldiers followed. Through the clearing of the mist, the soldiers looked down and saw a river far below. But too late they realized that they had marched right off the edge of a cliff. The horses reared and panicked, and the men screamed and shouted, but it was no use. The 5 soldiers and their horses plummeted off the mountain to a brutal, rocky death. The place they fell is known as Loch na Gael, or the Stranger's Leap. The piper and the white stallion did not fall. He kept marching on into thin air until he disappeared from view. 6 horses had marched off the edge of that cliff, and 5 fell. And as for Sir Fredrick Hamilton, although he didn't meet justice on that day, changing tides resulted in his loss of favour and fortune. He was rewarded little for his military service, and Sir Fredrick Hamilton died in poverty. And even more poetically, his legacy, Manor Hamilton, was set on fire and fell into ruins. Ruins that still lie in County Leitrim to this day. The end. Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore and mythology, retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. Olhan. I'm your host and your Fireside Bard, and you're very welcome to episode 255 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling podcast, we just had the tale of the Curse of Fire and Shadows. Wonderful name, I think, for a story, and a very interesting story, as I said at the beginning, for its overlap of folklore and history, often stories that are my favourites. But before we chat about that, if this is your very first episode, I hope you've been enjoying it and enjoyed the story. If you do like it, subscribe to the podcast, share this on your stories on social media. That's the best way to spread the good name of it. If you really want to support the podcast, you can join Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com. We have updated the pricing scheme for Headstuff Plus membership. It is now, to be honest, I think it benefits more now if you are just a fan of Fireside and maybe not of all of the podcasts on the Headstuff Podcast Network, but there is also another incentive if you are someone who listens to some of the other many wonderful podcasts on the Headstuff Podcast Network. So now for €6 a month you can access the solo support plan for just Fireside, and then for €8 a month you can get the premium support plan, supporting more than one podcast and getting access. Regardless, you'll get access to all of the bonus material for the Headstuff Plus network, ad-free access to all the podcasts and bonus material. And I'm very excited to finally announce a new series, a continuation of this new series of the subscriber only, which is our trilogy of episodes on Tom Moore's Irish folklore trilogy, on The Secret of Kells, on The Song of the Sea, and Wolf Walker's 3 animated Irish films which deal with various aspects of Irish folklore and mythology. So I have deep dives into each of them. The episode of The Secret of Kells will be out with this episode, and in the next 2 weeks, with the next 2 episodes, we'll be releasing our episodes on Song of the Sea and Wolf Walkers. This is adding to my episode on Hadestown recently, and we also have episodes coming up. I'm going to start doing episodes on different books that I'm reading, folklore inspired and otherwise, and just in general more discussions on other shows and books and films and various other media that deal with folklore and mythology and kind of and storytelling, and expand the remits of Fireside, just as an added incentive to those who want to support the podcast directly, because no main episode of the series of Fireside will ever be put behind a paywall. That is not why I set out to do the podcast, and that will never be the case. So this will just always be an extra thing for those who want to support it, and it's very important that I do make you feel valued as well, those who are going the extra mile, because it is very, very appreciated. The final way you can support the podcast is by buying my book Garden Sea, a Neo-Myth of Home, on which you can buy from the Head Stuff website. We can ship that in paperback all around the world. That's all the sells out of the way. Now let's have a chat about this wonderful tale. I discovered this tale, like the story of the evil eye, a couple of weeks ago, from this book called Uncanny Ireland, this great series of books that I found through the British Library Publishing House, which included Celtic Weird, which a lot of the recent stories have been from, and now this is Uncanny Ireland. And another great book that I found that I was gifted for Christmas is called Land of Mist and Magic, which is myths and legends that shaped Britain. So we're going to be starting a new mythological series, which is great because it's been a long time since we've done kind of a core mythological series like we did in the early years of Fireside, which is going to be a lot of the attempts at myths for the island of Britain, from the Celts. And we've dealt previously with stories of the Welsh, but for other parts of the British Isles, mostly because that's where I'm living now. I'm living in London, and J.R.R. Tolkien had always said that one of the reasons he had written Lord of the Rings was that there was no mythology for the island of Britain, that it borrowed from a lot of other cultures. But there have been some very, very interesting attempts, which we will be exploring starting with next week. But for the moment, this story of the curse of fire and shadows, this figure, it's interesting to have encountered Oliver Cromwell even briefly, or be talking about the Irish Confederate Wars, because this is very notoriously one of the darkest chapters in Irish history, certainly for Irish Catholics, and really, really set the scene and paved the way for a huge, huge amount of conflict that would ensue until the late 20th century. But this episode focuses on a real figure, a figure who I wasn't familiar with. Was a Scottish Covenanter, a Scottish Protestant lord named Sir Fredrick Hamilton, who was essentially one of Cromwell's acolytes in Ireland. I was familiar with the town Manorhamilton in County Leitrim. I don't think I've ever been there myself, but it's quite a famous area. And it's a name you would remember, because it's a very wonderful name and kind of one word, Manorhamilton. But I didn't know the origin of this, and that's why it was wonderful to discover this story, because this very much at the time was, like, if you look up Sir Fredrick Hamilton, you will very easily find access to this story. This story kind of became a part of his legend, which insinuates that this is a story that it does exist from the time, and certainly that he did burn this church, and it's worth noting that that this story, whether or not it was written, but it was certainly first written down by W.B. Yeats. So this is late 1800s, early 1900s when this would have been written. But there is every possibility that this story goes back to the 1640s, which makes it certainly one of the older folk tales. And it's always interesting as I frequently say, what makes Irish folklore and mythology so interesting, to me at least, and I think quite unique, is the way it bleeds between folklore, history and religion. And we get a case of all three here. Like right from the off, we have a very historical setting, like real dates, like the 1st of July, I think it was like 1642 or 1641, when this monastery or this church was set fire to and all the inhabitants burnt alive, which there were countless cases of all around Ireland during the Confederate Wars and during the subsequent penal laws. But what is quite unique, and I say it in the story, is that this curse is put. Priests and abbots and friars and Catholics in general are not really known for curses. That's not really a part of, it's by definition, it's supposed to be quite a forgiving religion. Curses are reserved for, witches and druids and pagan figures. But of course, this is Ireland at this time when those worlds were bleeding together. So in any case, this curse is put on these soldiers, and very specifically these ones that did not hesitate, these 5 soldiers, who then hear this rumour of these 2 messengers who have gone off to find the O'Rourke clan, who will be closer to Manor Hamilton and will reach Manor Hamilton before Sir Fredrick can get home to defend it. And so these 5 soldiers are set out, and then shit starts to get weird. And of course, they initially find a banshee. They find a woman washing clothes in the river, combing her hair, crying, the classic image of the banshee. What is unclear is because banshees notoriously are assigned to specific clans. So is this one of their banshees, these soldiers, or is it a banshee from the now dead abbots? But she discusses this wonderful image of, how she phrases, of her son with rubies in his hair, before they reach the piper. Oh yes, a crown of silver adorned with rubies. Maybe you listeners would be smarter than me. I wasn't able to find what exactly she would be referencing there, unless it was some, Irish god, some Celtic god. But we know certainly that the piper then found, which is interesting because with Sir Fredrick Hamilton being a Scottish Covenanter, we can assume that these are Scottish Protestant soldiers. And the bagpipes is very much not an instrument in Irish lore. It is very obviously iconically Scottish. We have our own instrument. We have the uilleann pipes, which is played with your elbow rather than blown into. So it would appear that this man who appears playing the bagpipes is almost mocking these soldiers. It is a form of mockery. And then he spirits this horse and leads them to their untimely death. So it is not overly long, but it is still quite densely packed because you're setting the scene again with real people, real dates, and a real tragic event that happened. And then as soon as the event happens, that's when the wonderful world of folklore and storytelling takes over. Something that would have grown from the day that happened, from that date, in that very specific date in 1641, all the way up to whenever W.B. Yeats wrote it in the late 19th or early 20th century, and now to your ears now. And it's so many of these stories are, some of them are easier to date than others. Some of them are almost impossible to date, as is just natural with the oral tradition. That's one of the wonderful things about it. But occasionally it's really, really cool to really be able to pinpoint the exact moment when a story would have arisen. It's curious as well because in a couple of 2 episodes time, when I release the bonus episode on wolf walkers, I wasn't expecting, because I'd never seen the film Wolf Walkers before, which if you haven't, I would recommend seeing all of the the Tom Moore Irish folklore trilogy. If you haven't seen them, they're wonderful, especially in an age of CGI animation and increasing uses of generative AI, to see a 2D animated film that is an the 3 2D animated films that are utter love letters to traditional animation. It's something they seem to have aged even better, like many Studio Ghibli films, certainly a lot of the early ones, because they have a lot more in common, this trilogy, with Studio Ghibli in terms of their tone and structure than they would say with Disney. They're much quieter and more nuanced and with less overt heroes and villains, and Tom Moore clearly knows his stuff and is clearly very, very deeply rooted and knowledgeable in the worlds of folklore and mythology. So it rang really authentically, and it's really nice for Ireland to have films like that in something that is still relatively unexplored on the big screen, you know. But Wolfwalkers takes place at the exact same time as this story. It's set in the 1640s, 1650s, very much during Oliver Cromwell's rule, and his official title was he was the Lord Protector, because there was no King of England, because they'd lopped his head off, and it was only after Cromwell died and his son had a very short and unsuccessful rule that they reinstigated the monarchy with the rise of Charles II, which led to the Regency in Britain, which was all of the big wigs and white faces and really adorned clothes and very foppish behaviour, which had all come from Charles II growing up in France. But curiously, in Wolfwalkers, there is a character called the Lord Protector, voiced by Simon Burnley, and it's the only time I've ever seen, outside of Richard Harris playing him in the film called Cromwell, which isn't considered a great film, but it's kind of astonishing to see one of Ireland's most celebrated actors playing what is in essence Ireland's equivalent of Hitler. Like Cromwell, depending on whether you grew up in England or Ireland, Cromwell is viewed very differently. Like, he's viewed as this Republican liberator by many in Britain, but he is about as diabolical a figure by all accounts to any Irish person, or certainly any Irish Catholic. But it was kind of amazing to see him in an animated film, and naturally he's portrayed as the villain in it. And I got a great amount of satisfaction from it. And it just made it feel all the more potent because I just adapted this story. So I was bizarrely in the Confederate Wars mode, and then got a chance to really visualize that afterwards and kind of go in a deeper dive in, again, a period of Irish history that is so murky and complicated, and not one that a lot of people refer to Cromwell a lot, but not about the intricacies of the Confederate Wars. It wouldn't get as much time and attention, certainly, as the famine, and then obviously everything that happened in the early 20th century with the Rising and the War of Independence, because this is so much before that, you know. It's like, this is deep. It's only about halfway through the 800 years of oppression, and one of the darkest chapters. So I hope, first and foremost, of course, I hope you enjoyed this story, but I hope if this is some aspect of Irish history that you didn't know anything about, that you will go on and learn a bit more about, because it is very, very interesting. It's very bleak, but it's fascinating stuff, because I feel like if you like this podcast, you at least would share some of the same interests as me. And again, I'll put links to the books. The Uncanny Ireland is the name of this. So please do subscribe to the podcast, share this episode on your stories, subscribe to Head Stuff Plus if you want to get access to the brand new bonus episode on Song of the Sea and Hadestown. Buy my book, Garden, Sea and Neo Myth of Home, on the Head Stuff website. Next week we will have a very unusual tale that I was delighted to find, something I'd never heard of before, which is always something great, which is the story of a grandson of Aeneas, after the fall of Troy, named Brutus, who would end up discovering the island of Britain. It is essentially a British equivalent of an attempt to link how the Romans linked Aeneas to the foundation of Rome. The Brits eventually tried to do the same with Britain, with interesting results, which I'm very much looking forward to sharing with you. I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Head Stuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.